The story begins in a small place where days often looked the same. The streets were familiar, the shops were old, and most people followed the same routine every day. In this place lived a person who never thought of themselves as special. They woke up early, worked hard, came home tired, and tried to find peace in small moments. Life was not easy, but it was honest. From the outside, nothing about this person stood out. They were not rich, not famous, and not surrounded by attention. Most people passed by without noticing them. Even neighbors knew them only as a quiet and polite face, someone who kept to themselves and never caused trouble. But inside there was a world full of thoughts, feelings, and memories that no one else could see. Music had always been part of their life, though never in a big way. There was no formal training, no expensive instruments, and no big dreams of becoming a star. Music was simply something that made the heavy days feel lighter. When the world felt too loud or too quiet, a simple song helped them breathe again, as a child. They had learned to listen before they learned to speak much. Family gatherings were often filled with noise, worries, and responsibilities. During those times, songs playing softly in the background felt like a safe place. They remembered sitting quietly, letting the words and sounds wash over them, feeling understood without anyone asking questions. Growing up came with responsibilities quickly. There was little time for hobbies and even less time for dreams. Life demanded attention, effort, and sacrifice. Still, music stayed close. Sometimes it came through an old radio, sometimes through a phone speaker, and sometimes only through memory. Singing quietly while working became a habit, almost without realizing it. The voice was never shared with others. Singing happened when no one was listening, usually late at night or early in the morning. It felt personal, almost private, like a conversation with oneself. There was no thought that others would want to hear it. In fact, the idea felt uncomfortable. Attention had never been something they wanted. Work days were long. The job was not glamorous, but it paid the bills. Each day followed the same pattern. Wake up, prepare, work, return home, rest, repeat. Some days felt heavier than others, but quitting was never an option. Responsibility came first, dreams came last. There were moments when doubt filled the mind. Questions like, is this all life will be? Or did I miss something important? Appeared quietly, but these thoughts were pushed aside. There was no time to dwell on them. Survival came before self-discovery. Despite everything, there was a gentle strength inside. It showed in how problems were handled without complaint. It showed in how kindness was offered even when it wasn't returned. And it showed in the way music was used to heal invisible wounds. Evenings were the most peaceful time. After dinner, when the world slowed down, music returned. Sometimes it was just humming a familiar tune. Other times, words escaped naturally, filled with emotion. These moments felt real, honest, and free. There was no audience, no applause, and no recording. Just a person and a song. The song was simple, with no complicated notes or fancy words. But it carried feelings built over years of experience, struggle, and hope. People around never guessed this side existed. To them, this person was quiet, maybe even boring. They didn't know that every song carried a story. Every note held something personal. One evening, after a particularly long day, the song felt different. The emotions felt stronger, deeper. The voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from honesty. It was as if something inside wanted to be heard. Even if no one was listening, the person paused after finishing the song, surprised by their own feelings. For a moment, the room felt fuller, warmer. It was a small moment, but it stayed in the mind longer than expected. Life continued as usual after that. Days passed, routines stayed the same, and responsibilities remained. But something had shifted quietly inside. There was a new awareness, though it had no clear shape yet. There was no thought of stages, microphones, or crowds. The idea felt unrealistic, almost silly. This was just a person living a normal life, after all. Big moments happened to other people, not to someone like this. Still, music began to feel less like a secret and more like a part of identity. It wasn't something to hide, but it also wasn't something to show. It simply existed. Small signs appeared without being noticed at first. A coworker once paused and listened when a tune slipped out during work. A stranger smiled when a familiar melody was hummed while waiting in line. These moments were brief, almost forgettable, but they planted something quietly. The person brushed it off, thinking nothing of it. People smile for many reasons. It didn't mean anything, but deep inside there was a growing feeling that something unexpected could happen. Not hope exactly, and not fear either. Just a quiet curiosity. That night, lying in bed, the simple song played again in the mind. It felt comforting, like an old friend. The person didn't know it yet, but this song, so ordinary and personal, was slowly preparing the way for a moment that would change everything. For now, life remained simple. No spotlight. No attention, no recognition. Just a quiet person, a quiet song, and a world that had not yet stopped to listen. Days passed as usual, but life had a subtle way of shifting when least expected. One morning, the quiet person received an invitation, simple and casual, yet enough to disturb the familiar rhythm of their world. It came from someone they had met only a few times, someone who saw more than others did. The invitation was for a small community gathering. There was no promise of fame or applause. In fact, the person could have ignored it and continued life as usual. But something inside whispered that this small event might be worth noticing. At first, there was hesitation. The idea of being in front of people, even for a few minutes, was uncomfortable. Life had always been about observing, not performing. The thought of eyes watching, listening, and judging created a nervous flutter in the chest. Doubts filled the mind. Would anyone care? Would the song sound right? Was this a mistake? Despite these questions, a quiet curiosity grew. There was no certainty, only a small spark of interest. The person finally decided to attend, not knowing exactly why. Perhaps it was a need for change, a break from the routine, or just a simple desire to see the world outside familiar walls. The decision was made in a single, calm moment, without fanfare, and the person prepared as simply as possible. The day of the gathering arrived. The place was modest, filled with a mix of people, neighbors, local workers, and a few visitors. The atmosphere was casual. Some were chatting, some were laughing, and some were quietly observing. No one expected much, not even the person themselves. The event was not about talent or achievement. It was about community and connection. As the person waited, a quiet tension grew. Their hands felt slightly cold, and their heart beat a little faster than usual. The song they had chosen was simple, one they had sung countless times alone. It was familiar and comforting, but now it seemed to carry more weight. Each note felt like a thread connecting them to the people around. The thought of sharing something so personal made them pause. Then the moment came. Someone called for a performance, not as a demand, but as a gentle request. The person took a deep breath, standing before a group of faces that seemed both ordinary and important. There was no grand stage, no spotlight, and no expectation of perfection. Just a small room filled with real people listening. As the first notes escaped, there was a quietness in the room that the person had never experienced before. The voice, simple and untrained, carried honesty. It was not about technical skill, but about emotion, about truth. The words of the song seemed to float in the air, reaching each listener in a unique way. Some faces softened, some eyes glistened, and some people leaned closer without realizing it. The room felt alive, in a gentle, unspoken way. The performer, surprisingly, felt a calm focus. The nervousness did not disappear, but it transformed into attention, an awareness of each note, each pause, each breath. Every moment felt intentional, even if instinctively guided. The song became more than music. It became a bridge between the person and everyone listening. Time seemed to slow, and the world outside the room ceased to exist. People started to notice the emotion in the voice. There were no extravagant moves or dramatic expressions, only the purity of a song sung from the heart. Some remembered their own struggles, some recalled lost moments, and some felt a quiet peace they had not felt in a long time. The power was not in the song itself, but in the sincerity of the performance. By the time the final note faded, a rare silence filled the space. The quiet was not awkward. It was a pause of recognition. Everyone felt something had been shared that went beyond words. For a few moments it seemed as if the room held its collective breath, honoring the simple yet profound act that had just taken place. Then, slowly, gentle applause began. Not loud, not demanding, but warm and genuine. People smiled, some teared up, and some approached afterward to express a simple thank you. The performer was overwhelmed, not by fame, but by the unexpected connection. The song, once private and personal, had touched strangers in ways they could not have imagined. The reaction was not instantaneous. There were no media cameras, no social media posts, no sudden recognition. Instead, it spread quietly, person to person. Neighbors spoke about it on the street. Some friends mentioned it casually in conversation. Others remembered the feeling of hearing a voice that seemed familiar and comforting, even though they had never heard it before. It was a small ripple in a calm pond, but enough to create movement. After the event, the performer walked home slowly, reflecting on the experience. The nervousness that had felt heavy earlier had lifted. There was a new awareness, subtle yet powerful. The voice, once confined to private spaces, now carried a sense of purpose. It had spoken without words, had shared without asking, and had connected without knowing how. That night, back in the quiet room where songs often lived, the person hummed the familiar tune again. It felt different now. The notes seemed brighter, filled with echoes of faces, smiles, and small moments of recognition. Music had always been a companion, but now it felt like a bridge between self and world, between silence and connection, between fear and courage. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of faces and voices, mingling with the simple song. There was no fantasy of fame, no desire for applause, only the understanding that something meaningful had happened, something simple yet profound. A private habit had quietly become a shared experience. Life continued in ordinary ways after that. Workdays were still long, routines still familiar, and responsibilities still pressing. Yet there was a new layer beneath the ordinary. The person felt a quiet courage, a sense that the world could hold more than repetition. Even small actions could reach others in ways that mattered. Even a simple song could carry a story, a feeling, human connection. The experience remained personal, yet it also carried a subtle transformation. The performer understood that being seen or heard was not always about recognition or reward. Sometimes it was about presence, honesty, and willingness to share what mattered most. It was a gentle lesson that resonated deeply, quietly reshaping perspective. Days and weeks passed, but the memory of the event lingered. Sometimes a neighbor would smile and nod, sometimes a coworker would hum a tune. The performer remained humble, aware that life had not changed dramatically, yet something inside had shifted forever. There was a quiet pride, not in skill, but in courage. There was a gentle confidence, not in fame, but in authenticity. The song, once a private comfort, had become a small light in the world. It did not need grandeur to matter. It only needed honesty, presence, and the willingness to share. The performer learned that impact does not always announce itself loudly. Often, it whispers softly, touching hearts quietly and deeply. And so, life went on, unchanged in its routine, yet transformed in unseen ways. The simple song had done more than bring personal comfort, had created a bridge between self and others, proving that even ordinary moments could hold extraordinary meaning. The days following the small gathering were quiet, but the memory of that moment lingered. The simple song, once a private comfort, had taken on a new meaning. It had moved people, touched hearts, and left a small but undeniable mark. Each time the performer hummed it quietly, it was no longer just a personal habit. It carried echoes of the faces that had listened, the smiles that had formed, and the brief connections that had happened in that small, ordinary room. As the performer returned to daily routines, life seemed unchanged on the surface. Work remained the same, streets were still familiar, and the rhythm of the days continued in its predictable pattern. Yet inside, something subtle had shifted. There was a growing awareness that music could be more than comfort. It could reach people in ways nothing else could. The realization was quiet, almost imperceptible, but powerful. It did not scream for attention. It whispered, and the performer listened carefully. One morning, a friend approached with a suggestion. It was simple and casual, but it carried weight. They spoke about a local event happening in the community center. A small gathering of people interested in music and stories. "Would you like to perform?" they asked. The question made the performer pause. Performing again? In front of more people. The nervous flutter returned, but it was tempered by a memory. The last time, the song had touched others in ways that felt real. It was not about recognition, not about applause, but about connection. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the answer formed. The performer agreed. Preparation was not formal. There were no rehearsals, no professional guidance, no scripts. The song was the same, simple and familiar. Yet it felt different now. Each note carried a sense of purpose, and each word carried the weight of experience and honesty. The performer practiced quietly, not to impress, but to convey truth, emotion, and the quiet depth of a life lived fully yet modestly. The day of the next event arrived, and the performer felt the familiar mix of nervousness and anticipation. The community center was modest, filled with familiar faces and a few strangers. The atmosphere was casual, but attentive. People spoke quietly, exchanged greetings, and waited for the performances to begin. The room was unremarkable, but for the performer, it felt charged with possibility. Every chair, every face, every pair of eyes seemed to hold potential for a quiet, human connection. When it was time to perform, the performer walked forward slowly, breathing deeply to calm the mind. The voice, once timid and private, now carried confidence built on experience and sincerity. As the first notes began, a hush fell over the room. The song, though simple, resonated in a way that was difficult to describe. There were no flashy moves, no dramatic gestures, just honesty. The room seemed to breathe in unison with the melody, each listener holding their own memories, feelings, and thoughts, yet sharing in the same moment. People reacted differently. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound fill their hearts. Some smiled softly, touched by the authenticity of the voice. Some wiped away small tears, memories of their own lives mingling with the song. The performer noticed the subtle shifts, the tiny gestures, and felt a quiet reassurance. This was not about performance in the traditional sense. It was about presence, empathy, and connection. The song became a bridge, carrying shared human emotion across invisible divides. By the time the last note faded, a silence lingered. It was not awkward or tense, but reflective and reverent. Everyone in the room felt they had witnessed something real, unforced, and deeply human. The applause that followed was warm and genuine, not loud, not demanding, but heartfelt. People approached afterward to express their gratitude, not for talent or skill, but for the courage to share something personal, something true. The performer walked home slowly, the weight of the experience settling in quietly. There was no desire for fame, no longing for recognition. Only the deep satisfaction of knowing that a simple song had touched others. Life's routines had not changed, but an internal transformation had occurred. Confidence, not in self-importance, but in authenticity, had taken root. The performer realized that real impact often came quietly, without fanfare, and that small, honest actions could resonate more deeply than grand gestures. Over the next days, subtle signs of connection appeared. A coworker hummed the tune during lunch. A neighbor referenced it casually in conversation. A stranger smiled when the melody slipped from memory into a shared moment. These small interactions were reminders that the song had transcended private space, weaving into the lives of others in ways that felt natural, human, and meaningful. It was not recognition in the public sense, but recognition of the quiet power of presence and sincerity. The performer began to notice a shift in self-perception. Music had always been a refuge, a personal comfort, but now it held a new significance. It was a tool for empathy, a means of communication beyond words, a way to share humanity without pretense. Singing was no longer merely about solace. It was about connection. It's about touching others in ways that were honest and intimate. This realization did not come with a sudden rush or dramatic change. Life continued, duties remained, and ordinary routines persisted. Yet internally, the performer felt stronger, more grounded, and more aware of the possibilities that lay within simple acts. Even a small gesture, like sharing a song, could ripple outward, creating moments of beauty, understanding, and shared humanity. Evenings were now more reflective. The performer would sit quietly, humming the song and thinking about the faces in the audience, the subtle reactions, the emotions felt and shared. Each note seemed to carry more weight, more intention. The song, once a private sanctuary, had become a living dialogue between the self and the world. It was not performed for applause or recognition, but for the quiet truth it could convey, the emotions it could release, and the connections it could create. The transformation was subtle, yet profound. The performer realized that courage did not always come with loud announcements or grand gestures. Often, it appeared in quiet choices, small decisions, and honest actions. Standing in front of a small group of people and sharing a song, simple as it was, required vulnerability and trust. It required opening the heart without expectation. And in that openness lay the true power of the moment. The performer reflected on the journey so far. From singing alone in quiet rooms to touching strangers with a simple song, each step had been guided by authenticity. There was no plan, no ambition, no hidden agenda. Only a willingness to be true to oneself, to express emotion, and to embrace the human experience in all its simplicity and complexity. That honesty had carried further than any rehearsal or skill could have. The song itself had not changed. It remained simple, familiar, and unassuming. Yet in the context of shared experience, it had gained new depth. It was a reminder that simplicity often holds the greatest power. Complexity and spectacle can impress, but sincerity resonates. The performer understood that moments of genuine connection are built not on perfection, but on presence, honesty, and the courage to share. As days went on, small invitations began to appear. Friends suggested gatherings, local events offered chances to perform, and neighbors expressed interest. The performer considered each opportunity carefully, remembering the lessons of authenticity and humility. There was no rush, no need to chase fame or recognition. Each performance would be a choice, a quiet offering, a continuation of the simple, honest journey, even in ordinary life. The performer felt a new layer of awareness. The world seemed more connected, more alive, and more filled with possibility. Small acts of kindness, quiet gestures, and shared moments of honesty were noticed in new ways. The song, simple as it was, had become a symbol of this potential, a reminder that even the quietest voice, when sincere, can leave an impression that matters. And so, life continued, blending routine with subtle transformation. The song, once private and personal, now carried the echoes of human connection. It was not about fame, recognition, or applause. It was about truth, empathy, and the quiet courage to share something meaningful. Each day, each note, and each moment of presence reinforced the understanding that even ordinary people, living ordinary lives, can touch hearts in ways that are extraordinary. The performer, though still humble and unassuming, now carried a quiet strength, a sense of purpose, and a belief in the profound impact of honesty and sincerity. Life had settled into a quiet rhythm after the small gatherings. But for the performer, there was a growing sense that something new was emerging. The song, once a private companion, had become a bridge to the world outside. People remembered it, discussed it, and even hummed it on their own. It was a strange and humbling experience to realize that something so personal could touch others in such simple, meaningful ways. One day, a local organizer approached the performer with an invitation that felt different from the previous ones. It was for a slightly larger event, still informal, but with more attendees and a wider audience. The organizer spoke kindly, emphasizing that there was no pressure or expectation, only an opportunity to share a song with others who might enjoy it. The performer felt nervous, of course, but the nervousness was tinged with a quiet excitement, a recognition that this was a chance to continue sharing what mattered most. Preparation was simple. The song remained the same, unchanged in melody or words. The performer did not rehearse obsessively, nor did they try to improve technically. Instead, each day was spent thinking about how to sing with honesty, with feeling, and with awareness of the lives that might be touched. The performer understood that the power of music came not from perfection, but from sincerity. Each note was to be shared as a gift, not a performance. On the day of the event, the venue felt larger and slightly more formal than before. Chairs were arranged neatly, and a small stage was set up. People arrived early, chatting quietly, bringing friends and family. The atmosphere was lively, but not overwhelming. The performer observed the faces in the crowd, noticing the mixture of curiosity, expectation, and casual interest. It was different from the small gatherings, but it did not feel intimidating. The performer had learned that authenticity created connection, regardless of numbers or space. When it was time, the performer walked onto the stage. The lights were simple, the stage small, but the weight of the moment was felt deeply. Taking a deep breath, the performer began to sing. The song, simple and familiar, flowed naturally, carrying with it years of personal experience, quiet struggles, and the deep honesty of a life lived sincerely. The audience was still at first, then slowly leaning in, listening with attention that seemed to stretch and fill the room. The effect was profound. People were not just hearing a song, they were feeling it. Some faces softened, eyes glistened, and small smiles appeared. Strangers nodded to one another subtly, sharing a moment of quiet recognition. The performer, fully immersed in the act of singing, felt a connection with each person without seeing it fully. There was no need for grand gestures. No need for elaborate skill-only honesty and presence. As the final note lingered, silence filled the room. It was not awkward or empty. It was reflective, respectful, and appreciative. The audience, moved by the simplicity and sincerity of the song, responded with warm applause. Some approached afterward to express their gratitude, speaking softly but earnestly. "Thank you for sharing that," one said. "It felt real. It made me think about things I hadn't in a long time." Others nodded in agreement, confirming what the performer already sensed. The song had touched hearts. Walking home later, the performer reflected on the experience. The nervousness from earlier had disappeared, replaced by a quiet sense of fulfillment. It was not about fame, recognition, or reward. It was about the shared experience. It's the human connection that had formed in such a brief, simple moment. Life continued as usual, but internally, the performer felt different, strengthened by the knowledge that authenticity had its own power in the following days. The ripple effect of the performance became more evident. Friends mentioned it casually, sharing how the song had stayed with them. Neighbors spoke of it on the street, sometimes with amusement, sometimes with quiet admiration. The performer listened without seeking attention, quietly grateful for the ways the song was reaching others. It was a reminder that even small acts, carried out sincerely, could leave lasting impressions. The performer also began to notice subtle changes within themselves. The act of sharing had increased confidence, not in ego, but in presence. There was a newfound understanding that vulnerability, when offered with honesty, could create profound impact. It was a lesson learned not in words or instructions, but in lived experience. Shaped by moments of courage and connection, even ordinary days carried new significance. Singing while working, walking through familiar streets, or sitting quietly at home became moments of reflection. Each note, each melody, each word of the song reminded the performer of the power of human connection. Life's routines were no longer just chores. They became opportunities to observe, notice, and appreciate the subtle beauty in everyday existence. encouragement began to appear more consistently. People offered suggestions, inviting the performer to small gatherings, community meetings, and even local celebrations. Each invitation was considered carefully, approached with the same sincerity that guided every note. There was no rush to seek larger stages or bigger audiences. The performer understood that impact was not measured by size, but by depth. One person reached deeply touched, more than 1,000 reached superficially. The performer's perspective on music and life evolved. Singing was no longer merely a source of personal comfort. It had become a language of connection. It conveyed emotion without words, built bridges without planning, and shared humanity without expectation. Each performance was an offering, a quiet gift to those willing to listen. The joy came not from applause, but from witnessing subtle recognition, from knowing that something real had been shared. Evenings continued to be a time for reflection. The performer would sit quietly, sometimes humming the song, thinking of faces, reactions, and small interactions that followed each performance. It was a time of gratitude, for the opportunity to connect, for the courage to share, and for the simple truth that honesty and expression could create meaning. The song had become more than melody and words. It was a reflection of life, struggle, hope, and sincerity. The performer also realized that this journey was ongoing. Each performance, each connection, each shared moment was part of a larger story that had no predetermined ending. Life would continue in its ordinary rhythms, but the presence of the song and the understanding it carried had created a subtle, enduring shift. It was a quiet transformation, one that did not demand recognition, but existed in the hearts of those touched. In sharing the song, the performer had discovered a new sense of purpose. It was not about ambition or success, but about presence, authenticity, and human connection. The simple act of singing, once private and personal, had revealed the extraordinary potential of ordinary moments. It was a reminder that courage, honesty, and sincerity were the most powerful instruments of all. And so, life went on. The routines continued, work remained, and days flowed with familiar patterns. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet evolution was taking place. The performer carried forward with a sense of inner strength, humility, and understanding. The simple song, once a private comfort, had become a symbol of connection, courage, and the enduring beauty of sharing one's true self with the world. Each note, each moment, and each audience, no matter how small, was a testament to the power of sincerity and the impact of genuine human expression. Life had taken on a quiet, a profound rhythm for the performer. The simple song, once a private comfort, had become a bridge between them and the world. It had touched hearts, created connections, and slowly built a small network of people who understood the power of sincerity and presence. Yet the performer remained humble, seeing each performance not as a step toward fame, but as a moment of shared humanity. One morning, the performer received an unexpected message. It was from a local organizer, inviting them to a larger community event, one with more attendees and a wider audience than ever before. The performer felt a familiar mix of excitement and nervousness. The idea of standing before more people was intimidating, but the memory of previous performances, of the quiet impact of the song, gave courage. They decided to accept, knowing that this would be another opportunity to connect authentically with others in the days leading up to the event. Preparation was thoughtful but simple. The song remained unchanged. There was no need to alter it or embellish it. Instead, the performer focused on intention, in singing with honesty, with feeling, and with awareness of the people who would listen. Every note was to be shared as a gift. Every pause was to convey emotion, and every word was to carry truth. This was not about perfection, but about presence. The day of the event arrived. The venue was larger, filled with chairs and a small stage. People were arriving steadily, some familiar, some strangers, all curious. The atmosphere buzzed quietly, a mixture of anticipation and casual chatter. The performer observed quietly, noticing faces, gestures, and subtle interactions. It was a moment to be present, to observe, and to understand the humanity in the room. When it was time, the performer walked onto the stage, feeling the familiar nervous flutter, but also a calm focus. The lights were simple, the stage modest, yet the weight of the moment was felt deeply. Taking a deep breath, the performer began to sing. The song, simple in melody and words, flowed naturally, carrying years of personal experience, struggles, and emotions. Each note connected the performer to the audience in a way that transcended language or expectation. As the song continued, the room became quiet, attentive, and almost reverent. People were not just hearing music. They were experiencing it. Some closed their eyes, feeling the emotions embedded in the melody. Some smiled softly, recalling personal memories. Some nodded subtly, acknowledging the sincerity of the voice. The performer, immersed in the act of singing, felt a profound connection, a shared moment of human emotion that seemed to stretch across the room. By the time the final note faded, silence filled the space. It was reflective, thoughtful, and appreciative. The audience had absorbed the song in a way that went beyond words. Then, warm applause began, gentle yet heartfelt, spreading through the room like a wave. People approached afterward to express their gratitude, sharing softly, sincerely, and personally how the song had moved them. It was not about talent or skill, but about courage, honesty, and the willingness to share something deeply personal. Walking home later, the performer reflected quietly. The nervousness had transformed into a calm sense of fulfillment. It was not about recognition or fame, but about the genuine human connection created in those brief moments. Life's routines remained, but the performer carried an internal transformation, a quiet confidence, a sense of purpose, and an understanding of the impact of authenticity. In the following days, subtle effects of the performance appeared. People hummed the song while walking through familiar streets. Friends referenced it in conversation, and strangers smiled when they heard even a fragment. The performer listened quietly, grateful for the way the song had entered the lives of others. These interactions were small, yet deeply meaningful, reinforcing the understanding that even modest gestures, when sincere, could resonate powerfully. The performer began to see music as more than comfort or habit. It had become a language of empathy and connection, capable of reaching hearts without words. Each performance, each note, and each pause was a chance to share humanity, to bridge gaps, and to create shared experiences. The performer understood that real impact was not measured by audience size or applause, but by the depth of connection and the authenticity of expression. Even ordinary days were now filled with subtle significance. Singing quietly at home, walking through familiar streets, or working in routine tasks became opportunities for reflection. The song was no longer merely a personal companion. It was a reminder of the quiet power within each human action. Every note carried the memory of faces, reactions, and shared moments, reinforcing the understanding that small, sincere gestures could touch lives in ways that mattered deeply. Opportunities to share the song continued to appear, each considered carefully. The performer remained humble, choosing events not for size or attention, but for the potential to create meaningful connection. The courage to perform, once private and uncertain, had grown into a steady awareness of the value of authenticity. Each choice to share was an act of sincerity, not ambition, and each audience received it as a gift, not a spectacle. Evenings remained a time of quiet reflection. The performer would sit alone, humming the familiar melody, recalling faces, reactions, and moments of connection. Gratitude filled these quiet hours, not for recognition or praise, but for the opportunity to touch hearts in simple, meaningful ways. The song had become a symbol of courage, honesty, and the beauty of shared human experience. The performer also reflected on the journey. From singing alone in quiet rooms to touching strangers with a simple melody, each step had been guided by authenticity and sincerity. There had been no grand plan, no ambition, and no hidden agenda. Each performance had been an offering, a quiet gift, and a bridge between self and others. The performer had learned that the smallest acts carried out with honesty could create lasting impact. The song itself had not changed. It remained simple, familiar, and unassuming. Yet in the context of shared experience, it had grown in significance. It reminded the performer and those who heard it that courage, empathy, and honesty hold more power than complexity or spectacle. Even ordinary people living ordinary lives could touch hearts in extraordinary ways if they acted with authenticity and presence. As life continued, the performer carried forward with quiet strength, humility, and awareness. The simple song remained a symbol of connection, courage, and the enduring beauty of shared human expression. Each note, each performance, and each moment of presence reaffirmed the power of sincerity. It was not about fame, applause, or recognition. It was about truth, empathy, and the quiet, extraordinary impact of living authentically. In the end, the performer understood that life's greatest power lies in simple, honest acts. The song, once private and personal, had become a bridge between hearts, a testament to courage and a reminder that even ordinary lives, lived sincerely, can leave lasting impressions on the world. The journey of sharing that song had transformed the performer quietly but profoundly, showing that even the simplest expressions of truth and emotion can create extraordinary connections, touch hearts deeply, and inspire others to embrace authenticity in their own lives. Although the previous performance had left a lasting impression, life continued to move quietly around the performer. Days were still filled with routines, work responsibilities, and the ordinary tasks of daily living. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet transformation had taken place. Each note sung, each connection made, and each moment of presence had begun to shape a deeper understanding of music, life, and the subtle ways one could touch the hearts of others. One morning, a letter arrived from a community group in a neighboring town. They had heard about the performer's past presentations and asked if they would consider sharing the Incepcio song at an upcoming local festival. This was a larger audience than anything previously experienced, people from nearby towns, families, and others with a shared appreciation for music. The performer felt a flutter of nervousness, but it was now accompanied by calm determination. They had discovered that authenticity and sincerity mattered more than size or spectacle. The invitation was accepted not as a step toward fame, but as another opportunity to connect and share in preparation. The performer spent quiet hours reflecting on previous performances. The song itself remained unchanged. It was simple and familiar, but it had grown in meaning through each shared experience. This time, the performer considered how to convey emotion even more openly. To reach beyond the notes and into the feelings of the audience, every breath, every pause, and every subtle shift in voice became a deliberate way to communicate honesty and human connection. The day of the festival arrived, bringing with it a mix of excitement and nerves. The venue was lively, filled with colorful banners, booths, and a buzz of anticipation. People wandered through the spaces, sampling food, laughing, and enjoying performances of various kinds. The performer observed quietly, noticing expressions, gestures, and small interactions. It was a vibrant environment, different from the intimate gatherings of before. Yet it felt like a new canvas upon which to share something meaningful. When it was time to perform, the performer stepped onto a small stage surrounded by the gentle chatter of the audience. The nervousness was familiar, but it was now tempered with quiet confidence. The song began with the first simple notes, flowing naturally from the performer's voice. Immediately, a hush fell over the crowd. People stopped walking, talking, and looking elsewhere. They were drawn to the sincerity and honesty embedded in each phrase. It was not about technical skill, nor was it about showmanship. It was about truth, emotion, and the quiet courage of sharing something deeply personal as the song continued. Faces softened, eyes glistened, and subtle smiles appeared. The performer could see children leaning forward, adults reflecting quietly, and older listeners nodding gently to themselves. Every note seemed to resonate differently with each listener, yet together it created a shared moment of empathy and presence. The performer felt a sense of unity, of being connected to the audience without needing to speak or explain. Music had become a language beyond words, conveying honesty, emotion, and shared humanity. When the final note lingered and faded, silence filled the festival grounds. This silence was not awkward or empty. It was reflective, appreciative, and reverent. People lingered, allowing the impact of the song to settle into their hearts. Then, warm applause erupted, genuine and heartfelt. Individuals approached afterward to express gratitude in quiet voices, sharing how the song had touched them personally. Some mentioned memories it had awakened, others spoke of feelings they could not articulate. The performer listened, humbled by the shared responses, realizing that the impact of a simple song could be profound and lasting. Walking home that evening, the performer reflected on the journey thus far. Each performance had built upon the last, creating ripples of connection that extended beyond immediate audiences. It was not fame or recognition that mattered. It was the quiet resonance of honesty, empathy, and authenticity. Life continued in its ordinary routines. But the performer carried a deep awareness of the subtle power in each action, gesture, and note. In the following days, the song began to appear in unexpected places. A local shopkeeper hummed it while working. Neighbors referenced it casually in conversation. Strangers, unaware of the performer's identity, mentioned the melody with a sense of quiet fondness. These small, unassuming moments were reminders that music had transcended private boundaries. It had become a thread connecting lives in ways that were subtle, yet meaningful. The performer began to notice changes within themselves as well. Confidence had grown, not in terms of skill or public recognition, but in the understanding of authenticity's power. Courage had taken root quietly, the courage to share honestly, to embrace vulnerability, and to trust that sincerity could create meaningful impact. Each performance, each shared note, was a continuation of this growth, a reinforcement of the principle that small, sincere actions often have the greatest significance.